real quick before we dive into the interview, during a couple instances during this episode, we had some issues with Zoom and internet connectivity. Andrew had such a fun idea of throwing in some slide whistles and different fun sound effects when he cuts out a few times. But Zoom, I thought, did a decent job of covering up for any issues, and I didn't want to ruin the audio by trying to mess with it in a fun way. Regardless, I think the conversation you are about to listen to will be super informative, and I think Andrew just has such a wealth of experience in different aspects of the 3D printing industry. So I hope you enjoy it. Thanks. First off, audience, thank you so much for tuning in today. You are listening or watching the 3D Print Authority podcast. My name is Adam Fosnot. I'm a mechanical engineer. I've been 3D printing for a long time with machines of all shapes and sizes, and I'm also the president of PowerBelt 3D that I started a few years ago, and it's been a lot of fun. Joining me today is Andrew Sink. Andrew, I wanted to bring you on because you have kind of a cross section, I think, of industrial and hobby level 3D printing experience. Plus, you've got some entrepreneurial endeavors. You make content, such good stuff. But could you go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, so hello, my name is Andrew Sink, and if you are watching this, you might recognize me from random YouTube videos, and if you're listening to this, you might recognize my voice from doing a lot of the voiceovers for my company's commercials. So
Okay.
I've been involved in additive manufacturing for about 10 years or so, and 3D printing, I saw my first 3D printer when I was in college, and it was just an instant connection where I'm like, oh, it's an everything machine. I get it. It's awesome. This is exactly what I want to do for the rest of my career. And so luckily I'm able to look back at that sort of first memory. And I still, when I'm seeing a printer making its first layer, I'm just as excited where I'm like, is it going to work? Is it going to work? How's it going to come out? And it's a fascinating field. And so in my day job, I'm lucky enough to be an application engineer for Trimec Solutions. Trimec is primarily a SolidWorks reseller, but they also have a hardware component to their business as well. So I work with primarily industrial Stratasys 3D printers. So typically we're looking at machines that are used on the factory floor. And then of course I do 3D printing during the day, 3D printing at night, like dream of 3D printing. It's just like the thing I do. And so I like playing around with hobbyist 3D printers, and I like trying new stuff. So a couple months ago, I made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich that was 3D printed. And just yesterday, I was 3D scanning like a Bojangles biscuit. So I'm kind of all over the place, but that's the general gist, I think, of my experience.
That's awesome. I can relate to so much of that. Not so much scanning a Bojangles biscuit. I'm pretty sure we don't have Bojangles here, or else I would have seen them at some point. It's a Southern thing, right?
It's a very Southern thing, yeah. And I asked the Charlotte subreddit. So I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I asked the Charlotte subreddit, hey, what is the most iconic part of Charlotte that you would want to see 3D scanned? Because I've been cooped up for a year. I'm excited to I'm starting to finally fly again and go visit clients. And one of my favorite parts of travel was always going to museums. So if I'm traveling to like Delaware, I'm going to stop at a museum and go take some pictures. And take some scans. That's just the thing I like doing the most. And so I haven't been able to do that. And so I was kind of asking people in Charlotte, like, hey, what's iconic here? When you see it, what kind of screams, like, when you think San Francisco, you kind of picture the Golden Gate Bridge. What does Charlotte have? And everyone on the subreddit was like, Bojangles biscuit. go scan Bojangles biscuit. And they were serious. And so I did it, and they absolutely loved it.
That is incredible. It's no Statue of Liberty, no Liberty Bell, no Golden Gate Bridge, the Bojangles biscuit, universal symbol of Charlotte.
The Cajun chicken one. That was what they wanted. And so I did it. And Bojangles actually sent me a message on Twitter, and they were like, hey, that was awesome. Can we get your address? We want to send you something. So if you're listening to this or watching this in the future, and I'm like walking around like a NASCAR driver in like head to toe Bojangles swag, this is where it started.
I would love to see that more than anything. So you mentioned kind of the first time you saw a 3D printer in school, right? Mm-hmm. And then do you remember that year specifically? I'm trying to pinpoint us in time. Sure. Like, where were we at between MakerBot starting at the beginning of the boom and where we're at today?
Sure. So it was 2011, and it would have been MakerBot would have they had released the first gen at that point. So they had released the woodcut replicator,
Yes.
and then the replicator 1X, I think, the one with the two extruders. And so a friend of mine who lived in Boston had bought a replicator and just wouldn't shut up about it. And like, I every time I saw a picture of it, I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever. I totally get why he's excited. And so I really liked what was going on. But at the time, there weren't a lot for sale, right? Like you
Hmm.
couldn't really buy one. And it just so happened in our engineering lab, we had a Stratasys Uprint, which is
Okay.
a larger, more industrial machine. It printed ABS with a soluble support material. And I didn't have any 3D models because again, I don't think Thingiverse was like really big yet. And so I didn't know what to print. I had taken some SolidWorks classes, but a friend of mine worked for Hasbro and he
Okay.
sculpted the faces for action figures. Like that was his day job. And so
Okay.
I sent him a really quick and dirty 3D scan of my face, and he, worked his magic and like sculpted the hair and everything and made it look like what you'd expect on an action figure. And I printed that on the Uprint, and it worked great. It was one of those printer that worked on the first time, something that was really critical to my success. I think if it had been like a plate full of spaghetti, or if it had had like a calibration issue or something, I probably would have been like, oh well, that was a waste of a weekend. So
Gotcha.
it was a cool experience, and I left wanting more. I'm like, okay, great, so I can do this. What else can I do with this machine? And that was again 2011. So 2012 was right around the corner. MakerBot was about to really kind of hit the spotlight, and so
Yes.
3D printing really took off like a bottle rocket right after I got involved.
Definitely. No, that's a good time to get started with it. I'm thinking in my head like there was MakerBot, PrinterBot had started some plywood ones at the
My first,
time. Did you have one?
yeah, that was my first 3D printer. It was a PrinterBot Junior, and
Oh,
it was like I got a Christmas bonus that year, and I was like, I am spending this on a 3D printer, and I bought a PrinterBot Junior. It was like 400, I think, for the machine, and then I spent easily like $1,000 in the idler gear was like hobbed all wacky, so I had to get a new one of those, or the hob bolt was wacky, and then like the lead screw was the wrong pitch, and so I just kept throwing stuff at it. It
okay.
was like it was very much a the printer bot. Yeah, it's my first printer. I still have it actually. And it's it held up pretty good, but it was definitely like I bought it as a kit, so it arrived in a
Mhm.
flat envelope. And that kind
Okay.
of experience of like what I'd seen at school was the size of a refrigerator, and then in the mail, it's like 3D printer in this box, and I'm like, no, there isn't. No way. This is like a ream of paper.
Yeah, yeah. It's so cool that you still have it. I love that. My very first 3D printer was an eBay kit. It was an acrylic frame i3 style. And when I outgrew it, it got cannibalized and turned into new printers.
Was that like a
Um,
2014 like ANET A8 kind of machine?
it was just like an ANET A8. It
Yeah, those
was
were everywhere.
me being myself, I didn't want to buy like the popular brand name one. I've gotten over that. I don't know if I've gotten over that quite. Um, I'm an Android phone person. So it's hitting me right now. It's kind of ingrained in who I am. But anyway, it got cannibalized when I outgrew it. I think it was probably 2016,
Okay.
around that time frame. Um, and so you were using the Uprint at school. You invested probably countless hours and dollars in your own printer bot. Um, and then from there, did you just kind of like keep tinkering and keep growing with it and keep using the one at school?
Yeah, I kept using the printer at school, and then my sort of journey with 3D printing was, as I was using this one at home, I found it was sort of equally fun to make videos of it and to play with it. And if anybody's looking, if you like, I took all the videos of my PrinterBot Junior off YouTube because the comments now are like, that thing it sounds awful because there's no silent steppers, it's super loud, and like the belts were kind of worn, so it clattered a bit when it ran. And so people
Okay.
were commenting in like 2021 like, that thing's a piece of junk, and I'm like, yeah, it was 8 years ago, guys, this was a big deal at the time. Like I was really stoked on this piece of junk. But yeah, I was playing around with the one at school. I was using that a little bit more often, and it was sort of starting to click in my head where like, the SolidWorks classes where I'm learning how to design things in CAD, and the 3D printer, it's like those two are slowly, I'm like realizing, oh, I can take the stuff out of the computer and then put it into the printer and then actually have it. And that was all starting to kind of click in my mind. And so during that time, I was working at a company that manufactured automotive components, so spark plug boots, terminals, things like that. I worked in the R&D department,
Okay.
and I was, I spent all my time talking about or thinking about 3D printing, and that kind of led to me co-founding 3D Central, which was a
Okay.
reseller of 3D printers in Virginia.
Gotcha. That's a piece of your history that I didn't know. Tell me
Mhm.
about 3D Central. That sounds super interesting. Hey there, it's Adam. If you're enjoying this video, could you go ahead and tap the like button? It's totally free for you, and through the magic of internet algorithms, it will help more people see the podcast. Thanks.
Yeah. So the more I got involved in 3D printing, I felt like I just saw the writing on the wall. Like, this is very, very popular. This is absolutely blowing up. And more importantly, it's becoming a lot more um, democratized, I guess. Like, it's something where you're starting to see, and this is a very mixed bag that, like, especially now with the gift of hindsight, I have like kind of weird mixed feelings about, but it was
Okay.
becoming very popular. And so as a consequence of that, a lot of schools were trying to get involved, but didn't really know where to start. And so my friend who had bought the printer up in Boston, and was talking about the MakerBot back in 2011ish, both at our jobs moved to Virginia to start a 3D printing company. And we were sort of feeling out, like, what does this look like? And for me, it was very clearly in the edu space. Like, I just saw limitless potential with getting schools and universities and libraries up to speed with 3D printing, because you've
Okay.
got this sort of rare situation where the kids are coming into school and they know a lot more about 3D printing than the teachers. And so the teachers and the principals, they don't, the 3D printer is, especially in 2014, a 3D printer is kind of a wacky piece of IT equipment. So there's no, it doesn't really fall. Nowadays, it's like makerspace coordinator is like the guy or the girl who runs the 3D printer.
Yeah.
But it didn't have a good bucket. And so different departments had a hard time buying them. And like what is a 3D printer? Is it a server equipment? Is it, like what bucket does it fall into? So yeah, so I spent a couple of years doing pretty much selling Lulzbot, MakerBot, and printers, in the sub $5,000 range to individual schools and EDU. And it was a
Okay.
lot of fun, and I got to see a lot of really fun stuff in the process.
Gotcha. So you started the company while you were still in school.
So I had one semester left, yeah, and it was actually one of my last. I think I can say this now. One of my last classes, I took an internship from the company.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
so yeah, so we had my friend, he put down on the paperwork that he was like the owner and I was like an employee, and then we went in, and then at the end of the semester, that was like one of my classes was an internship, and I got a very good review.
Ah, that's so cool. Actually, I interviewed Evan from Coco Press, and he did something similar where like he started his company, and then it was also a business class credit and an engineering class elective, like all three at the same time. And I'm like, that doesn't seem right to me.
I
Um,
just met Evan pretty recently. I met Evan in May, and
okay.
he told me that story, and I was like, yes, that's how you do it.
That's how it's done. You can double dip, triple dip while you're doing something that
Mhm.
that you love and that you're super excited about. Um,
Absolutely.
so you were targeting the education space and
Yeah.
libraries. I have some experience in that area. My mom is a teacher, has been her whole career.
Okay.
And also I ran a makerspace while I was in college.
Oh.
So
What kind of printers did you guys have?
we had MakerBot 5th generation replicators. Um, Possibly the most infamous 3D printer
Tough,
to
man. Tough.
ever be made. I
Yeah.
didn't make the buying decisions, but I did the best that I could to run them and educate people on 3D printing.
It's
Um,
got so much potential. The fifth gen was such an awesome machine in theory, but man, that
yes,
extruder.
it was. I think it was a stumbling point for them.
It
Um,
was, and it went through a lot of very late stage design revisions. And you can, if anybody's listening to this or watching this, if you ever get your hands on a MakerBot extruder, you can kind of look at it, and there's all these very clear, like, holes where a pinout should go, but there's no pin, and they decided, oh, we need to move something here, we need to move something there, and that was a fiasco. When I moved from Virginia to Charlotte, North Carolina, where I'm living now, I had a box of fifth generation extruders because we'd swap them out for people. So we kept a big stock of them, and customers would call them and say, hey, my extruder stopped working. All right, we send you a new one. And so I wound up with this enormous box of them, and I was just sifting through it like, good grief. They're
Oh,
that was the fifth gen was an unfortunate, but so a lot of makerspaces had them, and
yes.
and there's a lot of people who I think probably their first experience with the printer was seeing something curl off the plate, and they were like, nope.
Yeah, I think it was a stumbling block for them because of the extruders.
Absolutely.
Um, Whenever I took them apart, I was like, oh, 90% of this is great. It's just a hot end. But something went wrong there. Anyway, I want to go back to 3D Central. At the time, what issues did people bring up, or were people just curious about 3D printing? What were those conversations like with the schools?
So this goes back to sort of where I spent a lot of my time. And it's part of the reason that I absolutely love the job that I have right now. And the reason I love the job that I have right now is it's very narrowly defined. And so we can talk a little bit about later, like exactly what I do. But in 2014-ish or so, when we started the company, a conversation I would have pretty regularly is, what is a 3D printer? What does it do? How much does it cost to print something? And the media at the time, this was right around like 3D, alarm printing hands was a big thing. So a lot of people had ideas of what a 3D printer was and wasn't, and how it could be used. And so one of the kind of the busiest times of my life was we took out an ad on NPR that, hey, we're a 3D printing business in town. And we didn't know what to
Okay.
expect. We didn't know how many people. And it was like the phone was ringing off the hook. It was a ton of people calling in, and they all had ideas about 3D printing. And kind of like for me, the one that sticks out the most to this day is somebody called and they said, I've got a pool key for my key for my pool in the community, and I want to print a new one for all my neighbors out of metal. And metal 3D printing
Okay.
existed. You have DMLS systems in 2014. So I said, sure, I'll get you a quote. So I came back with a quote and I said, it's going to be, $800 per key, right? Like you got to buy 100 of them or something. Like that's the price. And the guy was really upset. He said, well, I don't understand. I can just go to Lowe's and buy this for $1. And I'm like, yeah, you should probably do that. Like that sounds like a good deal. And so a big part of my time was spent on that education from people who are coming in from absolutely no experience. One guy, we had another customer who was very concerned, and they said, I'm worried when you've got the vat of the 3D printing liquid, you dip the part in and then you pull the second one out, right? And what happens if the liquid spills on the carpet? Is it going to eat the carpet? And it's one of those like, hang on, we have to go all the way to the back. Did you say dip the part in and pull two out? He's like, yeah, small soldiers, right? Isn't that what happened in the movie?
Oh my gosh.
And so it's, so you wind up having a lot of those kind of conversations. And so a lot of those, especially in 2014, one of the really heartbreaking things for me, and that I saw again and again, were people who bought that same acrylic custom kit that you bought on eBay or
Yeah.
whatever, and it's like an ANET A8, like i3 style with little Z rods, and the whole thing is like flat pack, and they buy them for at the time it was selling for like $90, $80, whatever. Like it was like insanely cheap.
Yes.
And so they'd build them, they'd get halfway through and it would be just a mess and it wasn't calibrated and it didn't work. And they'd bring it into our shop and say, how much would it cost to get this up and running? And it's like, you're really not going to like the answer. Like, it's going to take a couple hours. And like, I have to charge you for that. It would be easier for you to take it home. But unfortunately, the resources really aren't there for you to get it up and running yourself.
Hmm.
So flash forward to kind of today, it is amazing the amount of content available on YouTube for people who are, their first printer. You can just search printer makes click, 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 thunk noise. And like the video pops up where it's a guy like, all right, so today we're going to fix the click, 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 clunk problem. And then you've got like the comments are all just like, thank you. I've been worrying about this all week.
Yes.
So so that was a big part of my time was spent having those conversations, which it was kind of very emotionally draining for me, because
Hmm.
on one hand I'm talking about how amazing this 3D printing technology is, and on the other hand I'm dealing with people who are just very, very burned out and very unhappy with the quality of the machine that they bought. And that conversation is like, well, it's $100, like, and it's there are printers that work really well, but then they're more expensive, and that's the kind of trade-off.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think in some ways, for some people, those conversations still happen. Hey there, real quick. If you are enjoying this episode, could you do me a favor and subscribe wherever you might be watching or listening? It's totally free. It helps you not miss new episodes when they come out every single week. It tells the internet algorithms to help our content reach more people, and it would really make my day. I hope you think about it. Thanks.
Regularly. regularly. So I still talk to people who professionally have sworn off 3D printing, and they're like, well, I used one a couple years ago and it was, it's kind of a dud.
Yeah.
And it's tough, like the first car that I owned was kind of like a piece of junk, but like I didn't swear off cars. Like I kind of stuck with it, and I was like, there's got to be a better one out there.
I
So
like I like that car comparison. I often look at smartphones too, where at this point in time, like my first smartphone was not great. It was super slow, super laggy. I think it was like an Android honeycomb that it was before the Google Play Store. A lot of people forget that like the first iPhones, there were tons and tons of people that hated them
the headphone
because
jack was recessed. Remember, you couldn't use your own headphones. You had to buy the special Apple headphones, and they said it was a feature.
oh my gosh, it's like
It's
so
flooding
Apple,
back to you now, right? Like the
yeah,
first iPhone didn't. The headphone jack was recessed, so if you tried to plug a regular set of headphones, like
it
a three and
wouldn't
a half,
work.
no,
Yeah.
you had to actually. So the first iPhone I had, I whittled the sides of a connector down to fit in. But like it was terrible. It was really bad
So you're telling me iPhone has had a war on headphones
for a long
since the
time.
very beginning.
The signs were there right from the get-go.
No one should have been surprised when they just got rid of the headphone jack entirely. Um, so what happened to 3D Central?
So
How long did it last and how did it wind down, or is it still around?
it's still sort of around. I left in 2018. I kind of sold my share of the company back to my wanted to more on reprinting stuff, and I was less interested in that. I was more interested in getting people up and running with machines. So around
Okay.
2018, I kind of sold my share of the company back to him, and then around that time, a friend of mine who lived in Richmond told me about. He's like, "Oh, you got to check out this amazing company, Trimec, where I work now." And he's like, it's the coolest thing in the world. It's all industrial printers, and you've got, there's tons of freedom in how you design things for printing. I was like, I'll check this out. And so I went in, and I kind of met with a few people, and I'm like, this is the way to go. And so
Okay.
I've been there for about 3.5 years or so.
Gotcha. That's very cool. Um, and so it's a little strange to me how you went from being an entrepreneur to having a job, but you also now kind of have some entrepreneurial side projects. Can you Can you explain that a bit? Because I've wanted to run my own company since I was like 12. It was always like so clear in my head that that's what I wanted.
Sure.
Do you have a take on that?
I've got tons.
Okay.
We could easily take up like the rest of this hour talking about my take on that. And it's spoiler alert, it's not great. Like I'm not a fan of like hustle and burnout culture because
Me neither.
it results in hustle and burnout. And so, my take on it is basically I did it and I enjoyed it, and I did it until I stopped enjoying it. And I've been lucky enough in life to meet a lot of people who still do what they enjoy. And I've also met a lot of people who are still working out of some sense of obligation, whether for somebody else or for themselves. And what I can tell you about running a business is you're responsible for everything. And so that part can be a little bit less exciting. And so depending on my job right now, the very narrow, if I had to define what I do, I'm helping people. I am getting people set up with a machine. I am just doing the applications, pre-sales, going to a customer site, and they say, we make light bulbs. We have a machine. It picks the light bulb up from point A and moves it to point B, and we keep crushing them. I'm like, oh, well, have you tried using like a rubber material? I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing. And so that very narrow slice of what I did was the part that I enjoyed the most.
Gotcha.
The part that I don't enjoy quite as much is hunting somebody down because the purchase order is 30 days overdue, or trying to figure out like, hey, how come somebody parked in my spot in front of the shop and like now I can't get in and now the door is closed. So like that part I'm way less excited about. And so if you're thinking about, starting your own business, just do it. Like don't put it off. Don't like, oh, well, I need to wait until I've got some money saved up. Like just go do it. There's an artist I really, really love named Tom Sachs. And he's been tweeting recently, which is very rare. He doesn't tweet very often. And one of the things he tweeted was, I'm going to paraphrase here because I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was do what you want to in life. And if it's the right thing to do, the path is illuminated. And I 100% agree with that. If you're on the right track, you sort of get that positive feedback and things work out very well. And if you find yourself running into stumbling block after stumbling block, then maybe you want to take a step back and say, am I enjoying this? Like, why am I doing this? So starting a business was a risk. I told my boss when I was living in Florida before I moved to Virginia to start the company, and we had a kind of a frank conversation. He said, what do you think about this job? Is it gonna be able to replace the money you make? Are you gonna enjoy it? Are you worried you're gonna move and it's gonna fail? I'm like, yeah, of course I'm worried about all that stuff. But in the meantime, I feel like I'm in the right place at the right time, and I was. And so I don't carry any regrets from doing any of that. But after a couple of years of it definitely started to wear on me. And
Mhm.
I could feel that I wasn't enjoying this quite as much as I used to. And the part of the job that I enjoyed, I was doing less and less. And so I was spending more
Okay.
and more time on the administrative side, which if you own a business, like that's what you will do. And so, and I just, and I wanted to tinker, I wanted to play. And I felt myself losing that ability. Whereas right now I can, work 8, 9, 10 hours and then immediately go to these 3D printers. And I'm like, it's still fun. Like I still enjoy it. And then, yeah, so so going from kind of the corporate world to the entrepreneurial world, back to the corporate world, and then I still have a bunch of entrepreneurial side projects. Um, Again, if you enjoy doing something, just do it. And if it's something that you want to try and start as a business, if you've got a 3D printing company, for instance, that you're looking to take full time, the only way to know if you're going to succeed is make a plan and execute and see what happens.
Gotcha. I love so much of that. There's so much there that I can relate to and also learn from, I think. Because Power Belt is so early where like there's administrative stuff that I have to do, but it's not the bulk of what I do. Like the bulk
Mhm.
of what I do is um, you know, refining the product and working on new products and all sorts of other stuff, which I genuinely enjoy. Um, and I really especially like the just start mentality. Just start in some small way. If you're out there thinking about starting a business or even a new project, just do it. And like you're gonna make mistakes along the way, but everybody does. You can't just keep like making excuses. I think I have reached a point, whether it was Power Belt or whether it was a club I wanted to start in college, I reached a point where I was more afraid of not doing it and regretting it than I
Yeah.
was afraid of it just collapsing and not working.
Totally legitimate fear.
Yeah.
And again, it's a big part of it is just go in to these endeavors knowing that, if you want to be the captain of your own ship, you are going to be the captain of your own ship. And one of the things that I heard constantly, especially once I got the thing kind of up and running with my partners, and it was moving in the right direction, I all the time we'd hear people say, like, "Oh my gosh, you run the company? That's awesome, man! If I had my own company, I'd sleep in until like 11 o'clock every day." And it's like that's because you think, oh, if you don't have somebody watching over your shoulder, of course you're going to want to try and slack off. But like if you slack off, you don't succeed. And so understanding there's this intrinsic sort of, if you want to push forward, you really have to work and you have to want it. And more importantly than all of that, it has to be enjoyable for you. And that's the thing I really stress, because I see a lot of people who have a really bad time on YouTube, for instance. And they're like, I'm
Hmm.
uploading 10 videos a month and they're not getting traction and I hate it. And like, the comments aren't there and I'm having a bad time. It's like, just don't do it then. Like just ask yourself, like, what is the goal? Are you enjoying this? Is the goal to make yourself happy? Is it to share information? I posted it regularly on YouTube from 2016 to 2018. And then I took like a 2.5 year break, like, because
Okay.
I didn't have time for it. I didn't really feel like doing it. And, I made a couple of videos. I'm like, I'm not feeling it. And then in March of 2020, I came back and now I think I've made more videos in this period than I have like ever before,
Okay.
because it's like fun again.
Yeah. No, it's cool how, to your point, if it's making you happy, you can step into it and step away from it. And I think be okay with that decision.
Because you're doing it for you, right? Like this is
Yeah.
something that, when I make videos, I'm ostensibly making them to share with people, but really I'm making them because I have something to say and I want to say it and I want to share it with people. And
Gotcha.
there's definitely an element of, if you get into that sort of robotic grind of like, well, I have to make a video because it's expected, or because, if I have to design a new 3D printer because people want it. The plotter tool heads are a perfect example. I had a lot of fun designing tool heads for plotters, And then I just got a lot of requests for like, hey, I've got this like custom made printer. Can you design a mount for it? I'm like, oh, not really. Like, instead do the CAD drawings and like you can mock it up yourself. And like that'll be we'll get there. We'll get you the thing, but like you got to have a little skin in the game too.
Yeah, I like that approach. I want to get over to Plotter, but you touched on what you do day to day as a full-time job, and I want to focus there a little bit more. So you help people solve you help people and you solve problems, which in a lot of ways is what businesses and jobs and technology is supposed to do, which is awesome. What types of companies do you help, and what does that range look like? Is it heavier in one area like automotive, for example, than other areas? Do you want to be a guest on this podcast? If so, go to 3dprintauthority.com/forms to apply. Thanks.
Yeah, great question. So I know, yeah, saying that I help and solve problems, it's very like synergy and business meetings, Mr. Business Factory. Like it's
Just a
very
little
generic.
bit.
Sounds very generic. So, a lot of the companies we work with, I can't share a ton of names or anything, but I can give general industries. And that's, I work a lot with Department of Defense. I work with a lot of aerospace, with a lot of automotive, and then commercial goods, commercial packaging, pretty much the gamut. Basically, if you make a circle around your room, there's probably 2 or 3 things in there where I've been to the facility where that thing is made. And that's
Okay.
the part of the job that I love the most, is doing a factory tour and finding out, oh, so that's how they get the stuff in the fire extinguisher. Like, and so a big part when we get inbound calls from anybody, printing typically have either a defined problem or they'll be unaware that they have a problem. So for instance, they'll say like, we make earpod cases, right? And like, hey, we're having problems. The silicone that we're using, it has to cool down before it can be formed. So we have to put it through a compression mold, then it's got to sit for like 30 seconds. And so we'll come in and say, well, have you thought about creating a fixture with air channels so you can like rapid cool it, and then you can go from mold to finished product faster? It's like, oh, I didn't think about that. Well, can I
Okay.
3D print that? And the answer is yes. And so I spend a lot of my time doing solutions consulting, essentially, where we're trying to figure out how can we solve problems. And that is that is like my favorite part of the job. I do a lot of DFAM training, which is design for additive manufacturing, for anybody listening. And that is basically, how do you design a part for 3D printing? It's just typically, most engineers, if you put an engineer down in front of SolidWorks and you're like, hey, I need you to make a fixture, they're going to start with a big cube and they're going to shave chunks off it until it's a smaller cube. But with 3D printing, we're going from the ground up, so we have way more freedom in how we make things. And so I spend a lot of my time teaching those classes on, okay, so you're a factory that makes thermostat covers. How can we design your thermostat covers so they can be prototyped without having to send out to have a tool made to have one of those designed?
Okay. Awesome. So DFAM is such an interesting topic to me because I feel like people approach it a little bit differently. Do you have like one or two tips of like what are the first things that you look for when you're looking at a traditional design and you're looking to apply design for additive principles to it?
Yeah, the very first thing that I'm going to look for is a CAD file.
Okay.
That is
Okay.
like,
Great start.
that's the most important, because it's, a lot of manufacturing is using machines that have been built over the past 70 years. So very frequently you'll be in a situation where an automated conveyor belt that makes Pepsi bottles that's been the same for 70 years, a piece breaks off of it, and the company that made that piece, like, the dude who made that has been dead for 2 decades, and like he took the CAD drawings with him. And so so how do you start from the beginning? So when we talk about design for additive, what the things that I want to see before I even talk about 3D printing something is, do we have design flexibility? Like, does
Okay.
this part need to look exactly the same as it did before? Because if so, DFAM is kind of a moot point. We can't make it better. Um,
Okay.
where I spend a lot of my time is not necessarily on lightweighting, but it's on toolpath preparation. So I spend a
Okay.
lot of time thinking about what's the linear length of the filament extruded to make this part going to look like? How can we reduce that? Because 9 times out of 10, the constraint that a company feels, it's not money, it's time. They want these parts made fast. So how can we pull as much time out of this part as we can? Especially considering if we send it off to a machine shop to get it made out of aluminum or Delrin, could be looking at 2 to 3 weeks to turn it around. But if
Hmm.
we have a 3D printer that can make a part in like 3 or 4 hours, now we're really solving big, important problems.
Yeah. In my experience, it's crazy how much print time you can cut down by like very carefully going through the tool paths,
Yeah.
both on professional level machines and on hobby machines.
Mhm.
There's just so many different levers you can pull.
That's a great way to
So
put it. That's an absolutely, that is like yeah, because there isn't one, unfortunately, there isn't an optimize button yet. There will be
yes.
someday, but in the meantime, you kind of you have to do a little bit of critical thinking. And a big part of that is the software that Stratasys machines use. It's called GrabCAD Print, and it actually uses native CAD files. So you don't use an
Mhm.
STL, because the CAD file has addressable faces. So an STL of a cube is a bunch of triangles, whereas a CAD file is 6 discrete surfaces. And what I spend a lot of my time doing is saying, well, how is this mounted? Because if this is just a cube where all the forces being applied from the side, we can select this face and add thickness to it. So it's hollow except for where it experiences this load. And you can sort of build in these stiffeners. For everybody who's listening, I'm sorry, I'm making a lot of gestures with my hands. So I apologize. This probably isn't the best radio, but basically, anytime that you have a part, you want to think about what it's coming in contact with and how you can add reinforcement at the point of need as opposed to globally throughout the part. That's where you really start making an impact.
Gotcha. Yeah, if there's one thing I miss about Stratasys machines, it's probably GrabCAD. Big fan of the software. If anyone from GrabCAD is listening, keep up the good work. But I love how you answered the question of where do you start with DFAM, because you started with it from a human aspect where you're like, let's see if there's a CAD file and let's see if there's design flexibility. Where I kind of took it from, or I usually interpret it from okay, the first thing I want to do is identify critical features. Like I'm
Yep.
already 3 steps down from kind of where you would start. But I think we end up at like a similar starting point once I'm
The
like
parts will look the
actually at
same.
the design
Yeah.
stage. Yeah, very
Yeah.
cool. Um, so we're getting towards the the end of our time, which seems crazy. We have so much to talk about. So we're gonna kind of rapid fire. I want to do plotter, resin laps, and then I like to end with some higher level questions about 3D printing. So let's start with plotter. What is it? Why did you make it? Let's start there.
Yeah, great. Like those questions I'm going to answer real concisely. So I actually just a day or two ago kind of put the ribbon on the plotter experiment. So I think I'm done with it. So I think I'll be putting it. My current plan is I'm going to try and open source everything and just release all the files and people can go crazy with it. But plotter came from I have struggled with learning the program processing for years. And it is such processing is basically a Java-based language designed for artists to make, they call them sketches, but like a spontaneous image filter, or you can do a lot of like mathematical descriptive art with it. It's just
Okay.
really, it's a cool programming language, but it always kind of bugged me that I had no application for it. So I can make a cool, like a filter that, turns you into a bunch of, stipples or like dots, but then that's it. That's the end of the line. And so I wanted to extend that. I'm like, well, I've got all these 3D printers and like I like designing stuff. And so I wanted to so I wound up making a pen tool head that would convert a 3D printer into a pen plotter. So you
Okay.
can, and this purely came out of my desire to learn processing. This was like a nice little project. And then I started posting pictures of it, and a lot of people were like, hey, I want one of those. And so I wound up kind of going into full blown, all right, I'll make a Gmail account, I'll make a Tindy store, and it became, I'd say entrepreneurial, but that implies like I made money doing this. I think at the very end of the day, I'm pretty sure I broke even, and then I went negative because I donated a lot of the profits to the Seattle Children's Hospital,
Okay.
because Joel Telling had me on. He did a 3D printing nerd did a video where he unboxed a plotter and used it on a live stream, and a ton of people bought them. And I was really grateful for that because I was like, oh, it brought a bunch of traffic my way. I didn't really want the money, and so I wound up donating all of it. So
Gotcha.
also, if you're listening, that's probably, if you're in this to make money, don't do that. Like maybe keep some for yourself. But yeah, so plotter was a tool head that essentially would mount to your Ender 3, and the idea was, the biggest issue that I ran into was on the software side. 3D printers, hardware, it's a known quantity, but how do you convert an image into something that's plottable? The tool chain is insane. So
Okay.
if you ask me what plotter really is, it's an instruction manual. That's like the most
Okay.
valuable piece of that puzzle. Was I wrote like a 20-page guide on how to take a picture into Inkscape, convert it into a grayscale image, convert it into an SVG, so it's a vector and not a bitmap, and then send that off to the plotter to convert to G code. And
Okay.
so I that turned out to be, I thought I could solve that problem. I wasn't able to solve that problem. I wrote dozens of sketches that the idea was you could sort of take a picture and then the plotter would just plot it. I thought it'd be
Hmm.
cool, like wedding photo booths and stuff.
Yeah.
Turns out very difficult problem to solve. So I think I've made maybe 100 of them. I think I got rid of maybe, or got rid of, I sold or gave away like 70 to 80 of them. I've got like maybe a dozen left.
Okay.
And so the other day I was like cleaning out my closet and I found them. I'm like, oh yeah, I should probably make a post on Plot or Twitter and say like, thanks for, so long, and thanks for all the plots.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for a fun project.
Yeah, it was a
Um,
very fun project.
but 80 to 100 is a lot. Were they all in the United States? Was it international?
It was international, which again, it presents its own challenges for me, both financially and morally, because I'm using filament that comes from. Luckily, I use recycled PETG, so I didn't feel so bad about it. But like the filament comes from New York, it's flown to Charlotte, and then I print it. The furthest one I sent out was to India, and so now I've got like this 3D printed thing being sent to India. And for me, 3D printing should be like the book or the movie timeline, where the whole point of 3D printing is that you've got a thing and then you can sort of zap it from point A and then reconstruct it at point B. So shipping 3D printed parts to me was like sacrilege. Like, why would you do that? And so it's expensive too, right? So an Apple from here to Moscow, $23, to ship like a $15 part. It was fun, but again, for me, writing that instruction manual, and you can still find it if anybody's interested. You can go. There'll be a link probably somewhere on here to find it to Plotter.
I'll get a link.
We'll
I'll
get a
put
link.
it
I'll
in
send
the
you a link.
description, both of the audio version and of the video version on YouTube,
Awesome.
so people can find
Yeah, and just
it.
download the PDF, and it'll give you a taste for how much harder it is than you probably expect to convert a JPEG into something a printer can read. I wasn't prepared for how hard it was. And again, if somebody solves the problem of like making an easy, I wanted to make a nice like ribbon, like a nice piece of software that would do everything for you. But it just turned out it was so many different steps. Everybody's printer is different firmware. G code is different from printer to printer. It just
Yes.
turned into a whole thing. And then on top of that, you have to calibrate it. It turns out calibrating a pen, it's a real pain.
Oh my gosh, so many challenges. I can relate to a small fraction of that challenge because I've
I
been an Inkscape user for years and years.
Gosh,
I love Inkscape. I really do.
it's like Blender. I use Blender, but like I also hate Blender because it's
Yes.
so hard to use, and like it's Inkscape is like Inkscape's similar, super powerful,
Yes.
super unintuitive. So
Resin Labs. What is it? Why did you make it?
okay, way more excited about Resin
Is it
Labs.
is it still an active
Yeah,
project for you?
it's very much an active project with like we're working on new versions right now. We're working on FDM version, so you heard it here first. And basically, so Resin Labs was Uncle Jesse on YouTube reached out, and he had seen I made a ton back in the summer of 2020. I built a couple of time lapse modules for my Prusa. I made a ton of time lapse videos. I had a lot of fun with it, and he sent me a message and said, could you make a time lapse for a resin printer? And it's one of those questions where, again, with 3D printing, the answer is always yes, but. And so this was a perfect example of like, yeah, but like, how would that work? Like how would this work? And so he actually was kind enough. He sent me my first resin printer, a Mars 2 Pro, and he's like,
Nice.
monkey around with this thing, take it apart. And I went through like several different ideas. So first I had it triggering from the Z stop. I thought, okay, every time the plate drops and hits the Z stop, it'll take a picture, right? Which worked great. And for everybody listening, we're going to take a quick 5-second pause. I'm going to let you figure out what the problem is here, because you'll probably figure it out a lot faster than I did.
The plate's always at the bottom, so you're not looking at the print, is my guess. You just end up looking at the build plate at the bottom, and that's not interesting at all.
Exactly. Plate drops to the bottom. It hits the Z end stop, and as it's going down, it'll hit the Z end stop right for the first layer, and then it comes down, and it'll trigger the Z end stop, even though it's not going all the way down on the next 10 layers or so. But after layer 11, it's not hitting the end stop
It
anymore.
stops. You're right.
So we get these buttery, smooth time lapses of like a submerged build volume. I'm like, okay, well that's not going to work. So all right, so let's do plan B. Okay, so what if we add a mechanical switch somewhere like at the top of the build plate where it can hit every time? Okay, so now we have to have the plate travel all the way to the top and then bottom, and it turns a 3-hour print into like a 20-hour print. All right, so we can't do that. All right, next idea. Well, the light shines up, right? So we just need to get a sensor above the printer that can catch the UV light through the tray. The resin's opaque, so the light escapes it. So finally, what we wound up on, and this was a really fun problem-solving project for me, and I went through a lot of things that, looking back on, I'm like, what were you thinking? Like, of course it's not going to work.
Yeah.
And eventually I realized, well, the UV light is it's pretty bright, and it's kind of towards the bottom of the light spectrum, that 395, 405 nanometer range, where photodiodes and photoresistors are very sensitive to that range. So I said, well, we could just have a photodiode that would capture that light, and it would use that to basically bridge the circuit to the shutter release. And so we tried that, and it worked. And it was like, finally, okay. So step one, problem solved. We've got the thing working. And Uncle Jesse has made just a ton. And actually, we just reposted one a minute ago. They're so cool looking because resin time lapses. It's like the scene from Terminator. It looks like it's just getting pulled out of goo. And for me, they're a lot cooler because it's a culmination of thousands of layers. These layers are an FDM 3D printer. You're looking at 250 microns. Here, you're looking at 1/5 of that.
Yeah.
It's like 900 layers. So you take those 900 layers, and even at 60 frames per second, you get like a nice 10-second video that just looks awesome of this thing sort of being pulled from the goop. And so it was one of those ideas. And so we posted some videos with it, like, hey, what do people think about this? And a lot of people wanted them. And so it turned into a whole debacle. I wound up, I have to import the cords from, I get them imported from overseas.
Okay.
And then I do all the soldering myself. But like the Suez Canal blockage caused like a problem with the cables coming in. Like I guess there are cables on the boat. And it's just been a fun exercise in sort of logistics and figuring out, what are, again, back to that customer expectation. The cable provides the shutter release, but you still have to use the video editing software. And so, so we're still kind of learning what's the best way to get people up and running. But I think last time I checked, I think we're coming up on 500 of them.
Okay.
And so there's way more interest in that than the plotter.
Yeah, 500 is still a ton though. You do all the soldering yourself.
I've made every single one. So if you've used a resin lapse, I soldered it myself.
That's incredible. I thought for sure that you would have to outsource that in some way.
I get the cables and then do the soldering, heat shrink tubing, and then the fun part is I test every single one before I send it out because I want to make sure nobody gets a dud. So if you got a resin lapse and it worked, you're welcome.
Very impressive. Many people are surprised when I'm like, no, I pack every box, every single one. Again, I'm looking at small numbers of shipped product. So again, we're coming up on our time here. So higher level questions. What is one thing that you don't like about 3D printing? So maybe you don't like how basically every 3D printer is black. Maybe you don't like that printers are generally slow. Anything you can think of. What would you say?
It's funny. It goes right back to that human aspect, like you said, like talking about the DFAM. The thing I like least about 3D printers is how much confusion around the term 3D printer there is, and how I meet people from all cross sections of engineering and people who make fishing lures, just like literally everyone. And the expectation of what a 3D printer is and what it does can sometimes be very far removed. And the thing I like the least is that without seeing one, it can be very hard to describe what it does and how it works in a way that aligns with most people's expectations, where it's very Star Trek replicator. Like you imagine there's this machine and you say, I want M40 screw go, and then like you pull the M40 screw out, and you're like, there it is. Um, I think that there's definitely it's a lot better now, but I think going forward, it's going to be more along the lines of when you picture a screwdriver or a hammer, you know what that tool does, you know what it can do and what
Yes.
it can't do. But with a 3D printer, there's still kind of a little bit of an unknown. And I think on the education side, that's really where that's the thing I like the least, is disappointing people when I say, sorry, it can't print a car door in one piece with all the window and everything in it. Like,
Yes.
yet,
Uh,
but not now.
maybe someday we can hope. The phrase that I use all the time when talking to people about 3D printing is, it depends. Can
Absolutely,
it
that's great. Like,
can it do XYZ? Well, it depends. How much of that is realistic? Why do you want to do that in the first place? So many other questions. Um, the next question is, what is one thing that, outside of what you do for work and outside of your side projects, what is one thing that you're very excited about in the world of 3D printing? So this could be a trend, a specific technology, or something that you want to see more of.
can I say 3D scanning? Does that count? Is that related to 3D printing
It's
enough?
close enough.
It's
It's
close
close
enough.
enough.
All
I'll
right.
allow it.
Okay, I got a green flag. That is 3D scanning to me. 3D printing has rocketed ahead of consumer expectations and just industry trends in general. Like what we're able to do, we're still kind of catching up to what we know we can make with these machines. 3D scanning has lagged way behind just due to difficult workflow. It's computationally expensive. And again, back to those expectations are starting from the very beginning. So when you hear the word scan, you picture like a perfect replica. But in reality, like, what if it's shiny? Philosophical very quick when you take a picture of a mirror, what are you looking at? Right. It's a very hard question to answer. Like, again, it gets very deep very quick, where it's like, well, it's the mirror, but it's also everything else that's in the picture. And so with 3D scanning, it's very similar, where we have engineers who expect a 3D scanner to be able to get down to like 6 decimal points accuracy, and we're looking for sub 10 thou resolution, and then you've got people who are like, well, can we scan a building because I want to make a foam core replica.
Okay.
So I'm excited that 3D scanning has become significantly more approachable by way of, sorry, I know it's an iPhone thing, the LiDAR in the iPhones, and on the Samsung phones too. Samsung phones use LiDAR. But Apple's done a really good job of the new iOS that's coming out for or not the new iOS, the new Mac OS, the desktop app.
Mhm.
It's going to contain, they call it object capture, and it's basically photogrammetry software. You put in 20 pictures, and then you select a mesh resolution, and then it spits out a part. And that to me is going to make this way more accessible, because there isn't a cost associated with 3D scanning in the same way we think of a cost associated with 3D printing, where like you can buy a better machine and get better results. But with 3D scanning, like, how does that scale? Was there a better 3D scanner? Is there better software? So I'm really excited because that's becoming more common, and it's becoming easier to have those conversations about 3D scanning. Whereas a couple of years ago, anytime I talked about 3D scanning, it was always like, well, I'm repainting my garage. Can you scan it to figure out the surface area so we know how much paint to buy? I'm like, not really. Like, it's a great idea, but like the technology isn't quite there yet. Just get a ruler, and you'll get close enough.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something I'm excited about too. And actually, to both of your points, those are things that have come to my mind over the last couple days. So I feel pretty good about myself and where I'm thinking about
You're on the
technology
right
in these
page.
areas. So my 2 cents real quick is, I have a weird feeling that the education problem might just solve itself over time because of the prevalence of cheap 3D printers in schools. I'm hopeful.
Cheap working 3D printers in schools.
Yes. Yes. I'm hopeful that it'll just fix itself. Eventually, those kids will get older, and then they'll teach older engineers what they learned in second grade. The other thing,
Yeah.
on scanning is, while it's incredibly relevant to 3D printing, I think it's relevant also in VR and AR and digital art spaces, maybe even more than 3D printing, when you lower
For
that
sure.
when you lower that cost and all of a sudden it's free software on Mac devices. I should clarify, I don't hate Apple in any way. I think they make good products. They're just not for me. I'm like being able to pull every lever imaginable on my phone. If you like Mac products, good on you. So when you have that software installed on so many devices, it just makes it so easy for people just to go around capturing different things. And then you can create libraries where people can share them with one another and import them into different software or print them. And I think it's a very cool technology. I'm excited to see more of it, just like you.
No, the AR VR thing is like exactly right. It's so much more useful for that than 3D printing, because I read somewhere, someone used the quote, and I forget who said it, but like it makes so much sense. It's way easier to have Thor and the Incredible Hulk smash up a virtual supermarket than a real one. And so like scanning all those cereal boxes and everything, and then making a digital environment where you can like throw virtual bowling balls at everything, watch it crumple, and then composite the image of the actors onto it. Like, of course you would do that. Like that, it's we're at the point now where a lot of these assets, especially in video games and things like that, they're photorealistic, right? So like it doesn't look like, it's not like 90s CG where like when you're watching like old 90s sci-fi movies and you're like, that is awful, it looks a lot nicer now. And so that's complete. Yeah. And so bringing that accessibility so that people have a better understanding of what is a 3D scan, how can I use it, and more importantly, like what can or can't I 3D scan. So
very cool. Where can people find you? Where can they find your projects, learn more? If there's anything specific actions that you would like the audience to take at this point, now's your chance.
Yeah. Selfishly, I'll say come check out my videos on YouTube. And I've made on everything from I scanned disk. A video I made a while ago that I was really happy about was what's inside an STL, where I opened up an STL in a text editor and just kind of scrolled through it. It's one of those things we use every day. I was super proud of that one, and it got like, I don't know, 1,200 views, and I'm like, come on guys, it's cool. I spend all my time on Twitter at Andrew A. Sink. So if you send me a message on Twitter, I'm usually really quick to respond. And then, of course, we have Resin Labs and Plotter. So Resin Labs and Plotter Toolheads, both also active Twitters. I think Adam's going to put links to all of those in here. And that's it. Come say hi. I'm very social. And obviously, if it's not obvious from this podcast, I really enjoy talking about 3D printing. So I'd love to hear your takes on responses to anything I've said so far.
Awesome. Yes, certainly links to all of those things will be in the descriptions of wherever you are watching or listening. Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to share your experience and your knowledge, and clearly your passion for technology in the industry with not only me, but with the rest of the audience. And I'll look forward to connecting in the future.
Absolutely. Take care.
Thanks. Thank you again for taking the time to listen to my chat with Andrew Sink. One of the biggest goals I have for this podcast is to help break down the barriers in between the hobby 3D printing space and the industrial 3D printing space. I thought Andrew would be such a good example of that, and I think he absolutely delivered with the experience and the knowledge that he shared in this interview, so much so that I'm starting to think that maybe the hobby space and the industrial 3D printing space interact a little bit more than I once thought back when this podcast first started. Please do me a favor and go check out Andrew Sink's content on YouTube. You can find him on Twitter, or check out his Plotter and Resin Labs projects. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to 3D Print Authority wherever you might be watching or listening before you leave. And you can find all episodes of the podcast on our website, both in audio and video format, as well as learn more about me at 3dprintauthority.com. Until next time, happy printing.